I am standing at the former site of the town of Times Beach outside of St. Louis, Missouri. Located along the Merrimack River, this town was founded by a local newspaper selling plots of lands to St. Louis residents as summer homes. However, by the 1970s, it was just another small town outside of St. Louis, with people growing up, growing old, and living their daily lives in. By 1985, however, the town was a ghost town, completely abandoned. No one was allowed in except for government officials. From the outside, everything looked fine. So, what happened in those 15 years that made everybody leave? Let's talk about the causes, the effects, and the controversies of the Times Beach dioxin poisoning in Missouri.
Times Beach was a town founded by a fundraiser by the St. Louis Times in 1925. St. Louis Times was a local newspaper, and they had land along the Merrimack River that they wanted to sell. So, they decided to sell it and market it as a place for summer homes. However, during the Great Depression, many of these summer homes eventually became permanent homes, and as the community grew bigger, it also grew tighter. Eventually, it was just a small town outside of St. Louis. Residents of Times Beach could not pave over their roads due to fear of the Merrimack River flooding, which happened often. So, they had dirt roads and hired a man named Russell Bliss to spray waste oil onto the roads, a common practice over dirt roads. Russell Bliss was a Missouri businessman who ran a waste oil management company. He would spray oil on many dirt roads to help keep the dust down, but he also disposed of the oil in other ways, such as burying it.
Now, let's talk about something almost completely different. The corporate transactions of major chemical companies in the 1950s. Stick with me here though, I promise this has to do a lot with our story. Hoffman Taft was a chemical company that made Agent Orange during the Vietnam War for the U.S. Army. Agent Orange was a chemical that the U.S. Army used during the Vietnam War to help deforest the jungle so that they could see the Viet Cong easier. One of the byproducts of Agent Orange is a lovely chemical called dioxin, which they stored in a tank on their Verona plant site. In the 1950s, Hoffman Taft leased out part of their plant to a company called NAPACO, or the Northeastern Pharmaceutical and Chemical Company. NAPACO also stored the byproducts of their chemicals in the tank. In the 1970s, NAPACO hired IPC, or the Independent Petrochemical Company, to haul their waste out of there so that they can make room for more. IPC, not wanting to do the job, subcontracted it to our good friend, Russell Bliss.
Russell Bliss then mixed the waste oil, which contained dioxin, into the waste oil he sprays on the dirt roads, and sprayed it on nearly 30 Missouri sites, including his own home, horse racing tracks, and Times Beach. So, what's the big deal? What's the problem with dioxin that Russell Bliss sprayed all over the soil? Well, dioxin is extremely toxic. According to medical news today, even a little bit of exposure can cause adverse health effects, including hormonal problems, infertility, cancer, and possibly diabetes. Some short-term effects are skin issues. Some long-term effects seem to impact the developing nervous system and the reproductive system. In 1971, clients of Russell Bliss began to notice that animals that had spent a lot of time near on the dirt began to have bad health effects. Many animals, including cats, dogs, birds, and horses, began to fall sick and die. Eventually, the owners of these farms caught up and realized what had happened. Russell Bliss was sued, and after the Environmental Protection Agency caught wind of what was happening, they got involved as well, and Russell Bliss had to locate 30 sites where he had sprayed dioxin. As the Russell Bliss fiasco began to unfold, the residents of Times Beach were told that they might have dioxin in their soil, but the EPA severely underestimated how much. In late 1982, residents of Times Beach were notified that their town may have dioxin in their soil, but the residents of Times Beach had other things on their mind, mainly the threat of the Merrimack River flooding again. On December 5th, 1982, the Merrimack River jumped over its bank and flooded Times Beach, the water reaching heights of nearly 43 feet. Luckily, most of the residents were able to escape, and the ones that didn't were rescued on boats. As the residents were resettling their town after the major flood, officials from the EPA got back to them on whether their town was in danger of dioxin. The answer was yes, very much so. The soil had contained 100 times more dioxin than the EPA considered toxic, and all the residents were in danger of being in the area. The town was immediately evacuated, and people were at a loss of what to do. With that much dioxin in the soil, it was unsafe for anybody to be in there. The town had to be abandoned. The residents were forced to ask for buyouts from the EPA's Superfund. Sometimes it took months or even years to get a proper price on their house. After all of the residents had moved out, the town was a ghost town, filled with houses destroyed by the flood, but no one to live in them. The streets around and leading into Times Beach were painted with words that said, "Danger, do not enter," or "Toxic ahead." When all was said and done, there were 30 sites across Missouri containing dioxin in the soil. Dioxin is not soluble in water, so it would remain there until the Environmental Protection Agency or someone else would do something about it. The Environmental Protection Agency decided that the best course of action would be to burn all the dirt in an incinerator, as dioxin was flammable. They chose the former site of the town of Times Beach to be the site of the incinerator, and they brought in dirt from all 30 of the sites to burn in there, and burned all the dirt in Times Beach as well. Unfortunately for the residents of Times Beach, this is where their story ends. The residents, after getting their money from the Superfund, moved all over, including St. Louis and other small Missouri towns. Many of the residents went on to live long and healthy lives, and only a few of them had bad health effects due to the dioxin that they were exposed to. Nowadays, the former site of Times Beach is now Route 66 State Park. After all the dioxin in the soil was burned, the site is perfectly safe, and there are playgrounds, walking trails, and large open fields where the houses used to stand. I actually filmed the first part of my project at Route 66 State Park, and can confirm that it was perfectly safe. I didn't even get poisoned while I was there. After spraying the roads with dioxin, Russell Bliss got sued. A lot. First, he got sued by some of the farm owners, some of which had lost up to 70 horses due to the dioxin poisoning. But as the EPA caught on and had to start spending lots of money on cleaning up the mess he made, he also got sued by the government. In 1984, the Environmental Enforcement Section sued Bliss, Napaco, and other companies for the dioxin poisoning of Times Beach and other sites. Russell Bliss says in an interview with CNN that these lawsuits ruined him financially and ruined his career as a businessman.
To this day, there's still a lot of controversy surrounding Times Beach, and especially about Russell Bliss, and if he was really at fault, and if he deserved all the lawsuits and the entire town making him up as a scapegoat for what happened. A lot of evidence supports this. Obviously, he sprayed the roads, which is a big supporting evidence. But the fact that he was spraying the roads with oil that he didn't know what was inside of it, he didn't know exactly where it came from, also supports the claim that Russell deserved what he got. Another thing that Russell is kind of to blame for in this whole catastrophe is he was assuring the property owners and the residents of the town that everything was fine. Therefore, it took them longer to react and they got exposed to more of this toxic chemical. However, there's also a lot of evidence saying that Russell Bliss didn't know exactly what he was doing. One major piece of this evidence is that Russell sprayed the oil on his own farm. If he had known the toxicity of the oil, would he really have done that? Another excuse that Russell Bliss has is mismanagement at the factory. Obviously, through all these transactions from Hoff and Taft and Apaco to IPC, there could have been a message that was lost, or that message being that the oil was toxic. Russell Bliss also said in an interview that people at the factory were wearing jean cut-off shorts and sandals and not taking proper safety precautions while handling the tank, leading him to believe that it was non-toxic. Whatever your opinions are on the guilt of Russell Bliss, one thing cannot be denied. The Dioxin disaster at Times Beach was a tragedy for many lives and many families who had to uproot their lives and move somewhere else from their cozy small town that they loved. Thank you for watching.